Welcome back to another episode of Engage. Ryan Argenta here with Charlie Mader. He's the chairman of the training committee. Charlie, welcome back to the Engage podcast. I wish we had you here for a more fun or under better circumstances, but thanks for being here.
Yeah, you bet, Ryan. It's important information we need to get out to the pilot group. So glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for that. And so we have a lot of AEs going on. A lot of pilots are scheduled for training. And it seems that your committee and the Delta MEC is just receiving a steady stream of reports from pilots that really paint a picture of dysfunction within the company's training department. Disorganized planning, inadequate pilot support, pilots getting kicked out of training hotels, pilots unable to reach their training planner or the training scheduler, reports of 350 pilots showing in Atlanta for a sim, but they were scheduled in Salt Lake City, but never notified. It seems like there's a lot going on and the company's not really being accountable for some of these disruptions, and pilots are having a hard time in training. Give me the nutshell. What is going on and what can pilots do to navigate the training system?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Just to be clear, I think the majority of the issues that we're seeing are coming from OE and sim planning. That's the majority of the feedback we're getting. The actual flight ops training itself is, and there's certainly a discussion to be had there that could be improved, but that's generally not the types of issues we're hearing. What we're hearing about, it does revolve primarily around planning. And we would hope that training planning would be helpful and collaborative and really just be there to support pilots as they're going through training. I don't think most of us view training as being something that we particularly look forward to or something that we particularly enjoy going to, but it's something that we all as professionals want to show up prepared and do a good job. We understand that it's a requisite part of this career. We accepted that going into it, and we want to study and show up prepared and do a good job. And all we're asking for is just to be treated respectfully, have the logistics taken care of for us, and be able to quickly reach out to somebody if things don't go to plan. And unfortunately, that's just not been the case. We've consistently been receiving feedback that pilots are not able to get a hold of planners in a timely fashion, especially on weekends and holidays. The planners have a weekend and holiday contact number. I've only ever gotten a busy signal, and I've never talked to anybody that's been able to get through to that weekend holiday planner number in less than a couple hours. And just in general, I think the theme is that when pilots contact planners, if they're able to get a hold of somebody, the tone is dismissive and unsympathetic. So I guess that's the overarching theme of what we're experiencing right now.
Yeah, and that seems troubling. Like you mentioned, we generally don't enjoy going to training for a variety of reasons, as much of a paradise as Virginia Avenue is. But there is an air, I think, at least, a bit of stress going to training. You're doing your CBTs, you're studying for the systems val, like on day one. A lot of it is self-study. Your check ride is an FAA check ride. You're getting a type rating. And so while training in general is very helpful for pilots, there is an overarching pressure system. And I know pilots take it very seriously and take a time out from life completely to focus on the training and to show up prepared and professional. And so it's got to be frustrating when pilots are faced with things like no notice scheduling or rescheduling of training. And it sounds like talking to you earlier, unlike the scheduling section of our PWA, section 23, there's a lot of rules and contractual obligations that whether you're notified or not notified and timeframes, your section of the contract training, section 11, doesn't necessarily have a lot of PWA defined notification requirements. Obviously hotels, not your section, but hotels are seemingly carved out of the PWA. What is the recourse for pilots if they can't get a hold of anybody? We talked about the chief pilot is the point of contact for pilots, but even chief pilots are having difficulty contacting the training planners, contacting the training department at Delta, and they're the chief pilots. So what do pilots do? What's your recommendation?
Yeah, there's a couple of really good points you made there. Yeah, first of all, the training section is very broad. It does give planning a lot of flexibility in how they schedule pilots. It doesn't define things very clearly. Like you said, there's no definition for notification of training, notification of an OE trip. OE just as a on a broader scale, if you read through the scheduling requirements for OE, there are very few. Essentially, there's none. Whereas when you read through section 23, everything is very clearly defined how these trips need to be assigned to you, notification, all that stuff is so clearly laid out. With OE, there's none of that. Essentially, your schedule, whether it be training golden days, those don't apply. X days, even golden X days, none of that really applies at all until you are signed off on OE. Up to that point, OE planning can schedule you however they want. The only real requirement is that they schedule you within Part 117 FAR legalities. That's it. And we hear from pilots routinely about just completely absurd OE schedules. Just last week, we had a pilot reach out to us that was scheduled for back to back to back OE trips with one day off in between, resulting in 15 out of 18 days that he would be flying OE. So, to say nothing of the impact on his quality of life, by the end of that sequence of OE, the quality of training is going to be so far degraded. But unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be a primary consideration when planners are scheduling pilots for these training events. You'd hope that quality of life and quality of training would really factor in, but it seems to be the main considerations are just efficiency and meeting metrics.
Right, kind of a logistical gymnastics for the training planners who likely they're not pilots, so they haven't gone through pilot training events. They don't fully understand the stresses and the pressures being away from your family, being on Virginia Ave at arguably or questionable hotels. So there's a lot that goes into it. So it seems to me that the company is probably under their own pressure to get pilots through training, and the quality of it and the pressures of it are not really considered. They're just trying to get somebody through. So, like you said, yeah, back to back OEs. There's been instances of, for example, you fly in on your travel day for a sim, or you're coming back from your weekend break in initial qual, and your flight is delayed or canceled, and now you arrive back in Atlanta at say midnight, 2 a.m., and you have an A or B period, and pilots are wondering, well, if this were a flight, I wouldn't have had my rest. So I call the duty pilot or I call fatigue, and that's it. But training is like this gray area. Do you feel pilots are feeling pressured, whether real or perceived, to just push through and get through it? Because nobody wants to spend extra time in Atlanta, but there's got to be a backstop or a balance at least, right? I know if I got in late on a delayed or scheduled flight and I had an A or B period, I'd contact my instructor. I would maybe even call the duty pilot and just say, look, I'm not going to be there. What do pilots do in those situations to slow things down? And on the line, we say set the parking brake, but there's really no parking brake in training. Charlie, what are you telling pilots to do?
We have asked numerous times over the last few years for planning to give us a protocol for that exact scenario that you just laid out. Your positive space company business flight gets delayed or canceled or diverted, and now you're not going to have nearly adequate rest, or even just you make it in on time, but then some sort of disruption at the hotel causes you to not get adequate rest. Again, that's clearly laid out for a pilot that's on an overnight as part of a rotation. But when it comes to training, there's absolutely no language that covers that. And when we've asked the company, what happens in these very realistic situations? We have 17,500 pilots. This is going to happen. We have a lot of pilots cycling through training. These are just the realities of having this large of an operation, that these types of things are going to happen. What should these pilots do in these circumstances? And the company has been unwilling to commit to any kind of a protocol or procedure. They just continue to state that they're going to handle it on a case by case basis and refuse to really give any kind of additional guidance beyond that. So unfortunately, that sort of leaves us as pilots in a really difficult situation when you're already stressed out. Like you said, you're wondering, are you going to lose pay for this? Because unfortunately, in a lot of cases, planning has been placing personal drops on pilots' training days if they don't make it or they don't show up to the sim or the training event. So there is that in the back of your mind as well. And it just leaves pilots wondering what they should do and who they should call, because it is not clearly defined. And if you call the duty pilot, they may be able to offer some assistance. They may not. Same with crew tracking or crew scheduling, most likely aren't going to really have a lot of input to give you. It ultimately has to cycle through a planner. And if you're talking about midnight or later when your flight gets in, you're certainly not going to be able to reach a planner. So it does leave pilots scratching their head as to who to contact and what to do next. It's really frustrating.
Yeah, it seems so. Definitely a gray area, lack of support there for pilots that we're used to getting through crew scheduling, crew tracking, et cetera, when we're on a rotation and the FARs apply. Without getting into the weeds here, but in Section 11, there is a PWA protection for pilots that you can't be required to report to training less than 10 hours after block in at the training location. So, in the scenario, the example that we just encountered, a pilot could point to that, right? You don't show up for your A or B period exhausted. Try to reach out to maybe your instructor or at least your sim partner. You can go through iCrew and find their number and send a text to your sim partner or something. Say, hey, I got in at 2 a.m. I'm not going to be there. And at least get that ball rolling. But know that you're protected and you can always point to that section of the PWA and say, look, I had positive space. The flight was delayed. I didn't get in. I didn't get my 10 hours of rest. I can't be there. And they'll handle it. It may not be right away, but they'll handle it, right?
Yeah, you certainly are not obligated to train in that situation. And certainly you should not be going to training if you're not 100% rested and fit and ready to go to training, same way as if you were operating the flight. So 100% agree with you there.
Charlie, what's going on with the hotels? I know this isn't your section, but it spans training where pilots are, quote, being evicted from hotels. What's going on there?
So this first came across our desk shortly after the Salt Lake City Training Center opened up. And it's a result of there being two very late departures from Salt Lake to both LA and Seattle. So historically, a pilot that was in a D period sim would have to spend the night after their training period was over. But now with these very late departures, they're around I think 10:45 p.m. departures out of Salt Lake, they can actually do a D period sim and then the company can still get them back to base that night and not need to get them a hotel. The result of that is the hotel is trying to enforce the standard checkout time of 11 a.m. and for basically forcing the pilots to leave their room 4.5, 5 hours before their sim period actually begins. We've addressed this with senior leadership, and to our understanding, it has been fixed and should no longer be occurring. You should be allowed to remain in your hotel room, which seems like common sense, but we did have to go through quite a process to get this agreed upon that you can remain in your room until your departure time to the training center. And our understanding is that is what is currently occurring at these hotels in Salt Lake City and I guess potentially Atlanta too. So, advice there would be if you are told to leave your room prior to the show time for your training event, please submit a DART to us to the training committee and let us know so that we can run that back up the chain and address that with management.
Yeah, that seems to be a huge problem that seems like it's resolving itself through your efforts working with the company. And yeah, I'll foot stomp that for you. Your chief pilot would be your first point of contact, possibly the duty pilot backup for any of these training issues, but contact the MEC training committee via DART primarily. You can also call 1-800 USA ALPA and ask for the training committee. That would be during business hours, but your DART is really the best track to get a hold of the training committee and let them know so they can collect all these data points and go to the company with these problems and find resolution. So foot stomp that. Charlie, what else is going on? What else do pilots need to know who are facing training?
I would just broadly expand that out to anything that's bizarre or strange or you need some clarification on or just want to provide again a data point to us of a negative experience or even a positive experience that you had. Please submit those darts to us. The more data that we get and we can track and take back to the company and show them that this is happening on a pretty broad scale, it really helps us out get some traction. A big issue over the last particularly the last 6 months or so have been recency scheduling issues, especially on the 330 and 350, getting pilots their landings and the scheduling of that. So if you experience any kind of issues with that, our interpretation of the contract is that the company can only schedule you for your recency landings on the 14 days that you submit. I'm sure most wide body pilots are pretty familiar with it, especially those that bid reserve. But our understanding and interpretation is that the company can only schedule you for that recency sim over the 14 days that you submit. If they schedule you outside of those 14 days, it is by proffer and you can decline to go. If you experience anything other than that, please submit a DART to us or, like you said, call us at 1-800 USA Help and ask for training.
Okay, yeah, I think the wide body pilots are wildly familiar with every time you log into iCrew, it says you're due for a landing. And yeah, you earmark 14 days of availability of when you can go to the sim. Sounds like there's some interpretation issues of the travel day where people have been scheduled for recency to travel in on a day that is not marked of those 14 days. So it's a bit of an expansion. I know 350 pilots with FRMS rest issues, they don't even have 14 days of availability on your schedule to give them. So it's like, I'm going to give you every possible day that I have off, and that's still not 14 days. So when am I supposed to go to recency? So definitely submit a DART and just be cognizant of that. Reach out to the training committee if you have issues with recency. And if you have no idea what we're talking about, or you're a narrow body pilot trying to get your bounces, welcome to our world.
Yeah, with the FRMS, just to add a little context to that, yeah, essentially the company's saying that if you submit days that fall within the required rest period following an FRMS trip, those days are invalid, which if you read the PWA, there is obviously no qualifying statements in there. You can submit any 14 days. So,
Gotcha. All right. Well, let's leave it at that for the moment. Unfortunate set of circumstances navigating training. Again, pilots take this seriously and professionally, they show up prepared. And so we're just looking for a little support from the training department on that front, and really just some kindness. It's crazy that we even have to say this, but some kindness and some compassion from really our fellow employees, our Delta employees in the training department, to just show some kindness and professionalism and some pilot support there. Charlie Mader, chairman of the training committee, thanks for the heads up. Thanks for the work that you're doing for Delta pilots. You can follow up with an alert that's coming out from the Delta MEC, and it'll be linked to this podcast description. But we'll have you back for some more fun stuff for sure, Charlie. Thanks for being here.
yeah, I look forward to that, Ryan. Appreciate your time and helping us get the word out.
You're listening to Engage, the podcast for Delta pilots. Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast platform, and receive notifications when a new episode is available.